दोस्तों नमस्कार, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Dr. Sanjeev Gupta, who has started a series on the corporate frauds. In today's video, I will share my little bit knowledge on the consequences of corporate frauds in India as well as the policy implications to minimize the corporate frauds in India. So friends, the consequences of corporate frauds may be studied on three aspects: the consequences on the stakeholders, the consequences on the organization, and the consequences on the economy as a whole. The corporate frauds has a devastating effects on the organization in which the fraud has occurred. It damages the goodwill and reputation, it loses the confidence of the investors, even it breaks the relationship of our economy with the other countries or the neighboring countries. The investment, foreign direct investment is also suffered due to the corporate frauds. So, we will discuss about the consequences on three aspects. The consequences of company fraud on an organization. Adverse effect on bankers' attitude in respect of granting of loans. When we approach to the bankers for working capital facilities, the attitude of the bankers is entirely different in case of fraud committed in a company. Decrease in value of shares. The value of the shares of a company is decreased in case of fraud is committed in an organization. Loss of confidence of investors. The loss of confidence of investors affects the stakeholders also as well as the organizations also. Loss of fixed and current assets. As misappropriation of assets is one of the type of the corporate frauds where the assets are misappropriated, so that an organization loses its fixed as well as the current assets if the fraud is committed by the unscrupulous employees and the professionals or the delinquent directors. Loss of net worth. If fraud is there, the financial position, the liquidity positions, the debtors, the assets are misappropriated, which decreases the net worth of the company. Bound to set unrealistic corporate targets. Once the sale is down, the profit is down, the management has no option except to fix the higher targets of its team. The loss of reputation of the organization. You see, if fraudulent activities are leaked into the public domain, the brand or the goodwill of the organization which it has created over a long period of time is damaged. Loss of customers due to negative publicity by media. The customers are also affected in an organization if the fraud is committed in that organization. The loss of sales. If bankers are not giving money, or if the foreign investors are not investing the money and the misappropriation of assets is there, then it may lead to decrease in sales as well as decrease in revenue. The loss of employees and lowering of employees' morale. It's very difficult to engage the trustworthy employees for an organization because number of informations are there which are very confidential. So it's very difficult to get the trustworthy employees. But if the fraud is committed, the employees or the morale of the employees is lowered and there is a turnover of the employees which affects an organization. The consequences of company fraud on stakeholders. The basic factors or the basic consequences are that loss of experienced and trustworthy employees due to their turnover. The success of any business depends on its employees. If your employees are the experienced and trustworthy, the business can grow more and more. But if the frauds are there, the organization can lose the experienced and the trustworthy employees, due to which the profitability of the company reduces and affects the financial position of the company. Loss of confidence of investors. If the frauds are there, the investors' confidence loses in such situations. Non-receiving of dividend for long period. If fraud is there, manipulation of financial statements are there, or misappropriation of assets, or bribery and corruption is there, the profitability will reduce and it will affect the dividend policy of the company. The next one is the loss of capital invested by investors. The foreign investors or the Indian investors who have invested their money due to these frauds, any type of frauds, it affects the financial position of the company, so the capital will be negative. The non-payment to creditors. If fraud is committed in the company, ultimately it affects the liquidity of the company, which leads to non-payment to creditors in due time or even after due time. Decrease in the value of their investments. It is right that the company is growing, but not as required as it was planned. The value of their investment decreases day by day once the fraud is committed in a company. The non-payment to bankers leads to NPA. Again, if the financial position, liquidity problem is there due to the frauds, the accounts of the company will be not in a position to pay the dues to the banks, and the account will be an NPA account in a short time. So these are the consequences of company fraud on the stakeholders. Friends, now I will discuss about the consequences of corporate fraud on economy. Adverse effect on overall growth of the country. If frauds are there, the foreign investors a company loses, it means more and more Indian currency money is required. So the overall growth of the country affected adversely. Imposition of more government control. If frauds are there, more and more regulations, more and more government interference. Higher cost of projects. Once the fraud is committed, the cost of the product is automatically increased. Reduction in employment. If frauds are there, the industries are closed down, which increased the unemployment. The slower growth of the economy also due to fraud in the corporate sectors. Loss of confidence of foreign investors. The loss of confidence of the foreign investors has an adverse effect on stakeholders, on an organization, as well as on an economy. If fraud is committed in an economy, the adverse effect on the foreign exchange earnings. Since fraud are there, the fraudster activities are in public domain, the sales is decreased, the investors lose their confidence in the companies, the brand or the goodwill is damaged, so it affects adversely on the foreign exchange earnings. Citizens have to pay more for their goods. The citizens, since the cost is inflated or the products are manufactured at a higher cost, so the customers are bound to give the more, pay more for their goods. The government bound to put taxes on higher side. Every government is run through the revenues earned by it. So if the frauds is there, less revenue is there, then the tax percentage or the tax slabs will be higher. So these are the consequences of the company's fraud on an economy. So friends, these are the consequences of a corporate fraud on stakeholders, on an organization, and on an economy. Now I will discuss about the policy implications. During my research, I studied number of cases, I studied number of research papers, the number of modus operandi of different frauds, and the provisions, regulatory provisions of Indian context as well as in other countries context. On the basis of this, my study or research work, I suggested some policies or suggested my views. So, what are the policy implications to prevent and curb the corporate frauds? These are: the first one suggestion is strengthening of the internal audit department and audit committees. The internal audit department needs to be strengthened by appointing qualified and experienced personnel. The Companies Act and listing agreements of different Indian stock exchanges provides for constitution of audit committees. However, no qualification or experience of such members has been prescribed. Due to lack of their knowledge and experience, frauds are often committed by companies despite of comply with the provisions of the different statutes. It is suggested that the audit committee should be given the freedom to act independently from the executives, and at least one of the member of the internal audit committee should have recent and relevant financial knowledge and relevant financial experience. Next one is the regulation for scrutiny of auditors' role and provisions for rotation. Specified companies or the listed companies are required to rotate their auditors, and the NAFRA is established to regulate the role of the auditors, although the disciplinary action is still taken by the institute, which is regulated and controlled by the political body of members. The role of the auditors and the provisions for the rotation is necessary to avoid the nexus that is created between the management or the promoters and the auditors of the company. The next one is the implementation of corporate governance in small and medium enterprises. The small and medium enterprises sector is the second largest employer in Indian economy. The applicability of corporate governance in SMEs may have the way for the companies to grow or attract additional investors as alternative to borrow from banks. The another one suggestion is adoption of international financial reporting standards, since manipulation of financial statements is one of the major type of corporate frauds in India. So, the organizations are mandatorily to be adopted international financial reporting standards. The next one is the conducting of due diligence by bank and financial institutions. Due diligence is there, but not effectively due diligence is done at the time of granting the working capital facilities by the banks to organizations or to the borrowers. So, proper due diligence must be there by the banks and the financial institutions. The appointment of independent professionals by the shareholders and to fix their responsibilities. Although the board of directors recommend the appointment of the auditors and it is the so-called shareholders who appoint the auditors, but still there is a lag between the independent auditors. So, the shareholders should be given a more freedom to appoint the independent auditors in a company, so that the nexus between the promoters or the fraudsters and the unscrupulous professionals, means the auditors, can be avoided. Friends, the next suggestion is the setting up of corporate office wing with criminal powers. It is right that the SEBI as well as the Serious Fraud Investigation Office has the criminal powers, but still it lacks some powers which a criminal court has. So, like an economic offence wing, and the Ministry of Corporate Affairs is requested to set up a corporate offence wing in parallel with the economic offence wing. The next one is the provisions for approval of related party transactions by specific committees. Since the related party transaction is one of the factor or modus operandi in the procedural related frauds, so the approval of related party transactions should be done by a specific committee in an organization. The publication of fraud prevention policy. No organization has any fraud prevention policy. No company means if 2 or 3% are there, it means negligible companies are there who has a fraud prevention policy. So, the company has to prepare a fraud prevention policy as well as to propagate this policy among its employees, so that what are the consequences if an fraudulent activity is done, and what are the consequences if you are found as a fraudster or an fraudulent activity is done by you. The next one is the recognition to companies for improved corporate governance. It is right that the Institute of Company Secretaries of India is recognizing the companies in the corporate governance model, but still we need more and more recognition to the small companies also. The next one is the coordination among different regulatory authorities. Number of regulatory authorities are there, like the SEBI, RBI, Income Tax, Chief Central Vigilance Commission, Economic Offence Wing, or National Company Law Tribunal. Like other authorities are there, but some lacks or some coordination is lack of coordination is there. So a system should be developed to develop a coordination level among these regulatory authorities. The vesting the SEBI with more powers to punish. Although the SEBI has powers, but it has to be vested with more powers. So these are the policy implications as suggested by me. So friends, these are the policy implications to prevent or curb a fraud in an economy. On the basis of my research, as well as on the basis of the case studies, I suggested some implications, policy implications. It is right that we cannot make a fraud-free economy or a fraud-free organization, but it is certain that we can minimize or we can reduce the fraud in an organization, which will ultimately affect in positive sense to the stakeholders, to an economy, or to an organization. In my next video, I will cover the regulatory provisions as well as the role of SFIO, Serious Fraud Investigation Office, in preventing or curbing the corporate frauds. If you like my videos, please share it and subscribe my channel. Thank you. Namaskar.